In this pod, we had a chat to a good old friend of ours, Roger Garrini, about strategic misrepresentation. What a great pod. What a story. What an experienced guy to have. And we threw around all sorts of topics. Dale, what's some takeaways from you, mate?
Yeah, it was great. Roger is heavily involved with the APM, but I must stress he came on here without any hats on and just freely spoke his mind. So it's unfiltered, as you'd expect from the Project Chatter podcast. And yeah, adding to what you've said about his fantastic career, we jousted around and debated the topic of strategic misrepresentation, what it actually means. Is it good? Is it bad? What are the positives? What are the negatives to take away? But we don't want to spoil it for everyone because a lot of people purely think strategic misrepresentation is lying. So you make your minds up, folks, I think. What about you, Val? Did you take any highlights you want to share for the listeners?
Yeah, I think, look, we went into kind of the definition of what we think strategic misrepresentation is and how we might want to solve that. And we also agreed that, technology can solve some things, but not all things. And it was great to talk about human behavior for a bit rather than just talk about, tools and do's and don'ts. But yeah, definitely an educated guy who knows his stuff. And it was a really good conversation.
Yeah, absolutely agree. Look, folks, as we say, keep listening, keep liking, and keep paying it forward.
Hello, project people. Welcome back to a brand new episode of the Project Chatter podcast, your favorite project duo, because Martin is not here. But Dale, it is so good to see you, sir. How are you?
I'm good, thank you. I heard you got a little lurgy. Are you okay? Little old you in little old Australia. Are you suffering a bit there?
Yeah, it is winter here, and woke up this morning with negative numbers, and it was not good. I actually lost my voice, so if I do go a bit deep, it's not for anything other than I have been struggling to speak for the last couple of days. So, but it's good to see you guys. I'm happy to start the podcast again. Let's get this on. Rain, hail, or shine, yeah?
Absolutely.
Good. Well, let's introduce our guest, Roger Garrini. How are you, sir?
Very well, thank you. Recovering from my knee operations.
Well, the good thing is this podcast is all sit down, so we'll look after you here.
Yes.
Just before we press record, you were giving us a great story, and I didn't want to interrupt you. I wanted to wait till we got it on air and we could talk about it in person. And the usual way we enter this is, especially for someone who's never been on the podcast before, is what's your origin story? How did you get into Projects Roger? And you've got a great one, so I'm going to ask you, how did you get into Projects Roger? Where did it start for you?
When I came out of university, I got a degree in metallurgy, which nobody has ever heard of now. A very poor cricketer's degree, I have to say. But nonetheless, a degree. And I was offered a job working on the 146 aeroplane, doing vibration testing and stress testing, which sounded so unbelievably boring. So I decided not to take the job. And then a friend of my dad said, "Oh, Marconi are looking for people to work on the managing of the new airborne radar project." "Oh," said I, "that sounds interesting." Got an interview and got offered a job as an assistant project officer on a salary lower than the one I'd already turned down, which was a bit of a blow, but never mind. And working in the PMO, as it would now be called, doing planning and, interestingly, starting to talk about earned value, but only starting. So challenging to plan a project or help plan a project, which was an entirely reinvention of the airborne radar industry in the UK. It had been dormant and subsidiary to the Americans since the Lightning aeroplane in the early 50s. And here we were in 1976 starting on this project with the strange occurrence that it was the largest airborne radar project ever in Europe and was soon overtaken by the same company, our company, winning the Nimrod AEW radar project, which was even bigger. I think the company had hedged its bets on getting one of them and ended up getting both, which gave us a massive resource issue that the project took a very long time to recover from. So where they were expecting to have 250 engineers, they'd got 50 or 100 or so, and the AW project had the same problem. So it was fraught, to say the least, and plans were very difficult to produce, not least because most of the engineers weren't used to the idea of planning at all. They just went on and did their fiddling around with stuff and hoped that it would sort of build into a radar. But a pulse Doppler radar, which was what the Fox Hunter as it became, was an entirely different level from anybody in Marconi had experienced before. But of course, we were owned by GC, so could fund the project while it was going on, although it was cost plus, so the costs were reimbursed, which is a good thing and a bad thing. Let's be clear, from a getting on with it kind of idea, a cost plus contract is a great way to go because all the risk sits with the customer. And the customer, unfortunately, was equally incompetent at running it because they'd never done one either. They had a couple of radar engineers at the RSRE, as it was called at the time, who'd worked on and were very clever and smart about airborne radar, but they'd never actually got involved in building a real production one. So it was a very, very, very ambitious project with a ludicrous timescale, in that it was going to be in production, flight trialed, and so on within 5 years. Hopelessly optimistic, but that was what was. And we'll come back to that maybe. Come back when we talk about strategic misrepresentation. Yeah, from there I worked on the test equipment and the automatic test equipment, which is double jeopardy because you've got the development of the test equipment itself, which is advanced, and then you've also got to match that to a changing build standard of the main equipment, which you've got to test. And all sorts of rivalries were around with who was building the best test equipment, the engineer with their lash up or us with our serious, going to last for years test equipment in the test equipment group. And that was reinforced a bit, those things that we didn't know about called collaboration and stuff like that and concurrent engineering. So from there, I went by various means in and out of the project office, then to become a project manager for one of these automatic test equipments. And from there, back into a project office around the time that we were bidding for the Eurofighter radar, which was a whole different game again, multinational and very complicated with Americans as well, in Hughes, and that proved quite difficult. There were times when they couldn't tell us what their radar did and we couldn't tell them what we knew, so it got all quite difficult because it was a European project. So from there I got chucked into investment projects, one of which became something called a helicopter approach aid, which was a gadget to modify a weather radar, airborne weather radar, into a proper airborne radar to detect an oil rig, because in the North Sea at the time they were flying beyond the point of no return to find oil rigs, and so they'd gone past the halfway point. And they had to find somewhere to land, but the rules said that you had to see the rig from so far away before you could land on it, so they cheated. They would use the weather radar to get a rough idea of range and then sidle along at sea level until they saw the rig and said, "Oh, there it is. We knew it was there all along." And clearly there was a safety issue, which they still haven't solved. They now use GPS to say where the rig is very accurately, and very accurate or reasonably accurate to say where the helicopter is, and therefore it must be somewhere in between. If there's anything in the way, you can't see it, which you can with the radar. Anyway, never mind. Moving on. From there, I got involved in all sorts of what I called wacky radars, which were strange gadgets. So there was this gadget for the civil helicopter market. Different attitudes entirely. What's the price was the only thing they were interested in, really, and we couldn't tell them, which got them quite across. But they were very keen to help with the development. And from there into cars and intelligent cruise control and parking, using now lasers as the sensor. We had a laser group who had not a lot to do in the research area, and I was told, you're going to project manage them, off you go, which caused all sorts of riots. What do you know about lasers? I said, nothing, but what do you know about project management? Oops. Wasn't doing very well in the popularity contest until such times as I had an argument with the head of the research lab. Well, not an argument, discussion. He said, what do you know about lasers? And I said, nothing, but I do know that people are extrapolating from a point to get an answer they want, and that's not very scientific. So something's got to change. Anyway, in the end, we all got on very well, but never mind. Excuse me. So cars was very interesting because we were working with Jaguar cars, and they had a completely different attitude from our systems-led thinking. So what does this need to do? Let's design something to do it. They said, where do you want to put the gadget on the car? And we said, what gadget? And they said, aren't you just going to tell us what it is and we'll stick it on the car and try it out? And we said, oh, no, you're going to tell us what it needs to do and we'll make it do it. And we had a couple of 3 meetings where we passed 3 and 4pence were going to a dance a bit. But, and it was very interesting. But in the end, they quite got into the idea they had to think about what they wanted their car to do. And then we got involved with Ford from America, who had a requirement for an intelligent cruise control sensor, nobody having done it. Well, we made one work with some very advanced tracking software, and we had a couple of rather brilliant guys working in the lab, and they made this software into a then exciting, I think it was a 486 PC. It was very exciting that we could actually get hold of one, wow. And it was a PC as well. There's no laptops in those days. A laptop was meant that it fitted on your lap if you could hold on to enough stuff. So we made that work. In fact, Jaguar sat with us in the back of our trials car, which was a Ford Sierra, which had a great big box bolted onto the front, like some sort of kangaroo bar or basher or something, and with a tiny laser radar sensor in the front, fed back to the PC at the boot of the Jaguar trials cars and the Sierra, and using an oscilloscope to show that we were tracking the target. Jaguar didn't like us calling them targets. They said, these are they're not. We're not trying to kill these people. But radar, we talk about targets. Yeah, but in cars, we talk about fellow travellers. So we couldn't call them targets, but we made it work, and I think that was a great stimulus to the idea of intelligent cruise control, which you now see on just about every kind of car you've ever heard of. From there, it kind of ran out because we decided to focus back onto main projects. And I got moved to the electronic warfare division, anti-radar. And from there, I ran a project which was quite surprising in that the people in the team had no idea what was going on. And in fact, the previous project manager kept them out of knowing what was going on, what the timescales were, what the budgets were. But I said to the guys who were making these spares, do you know what the budget is? They said, we're not allowed to know that. So what about the timescales? We're not allowed to know that. What about the design standard? Well, we got this bit of paper here. And so we had some discussions, and I remember right here, configuration management plan says I can do what I want. And I got my boss to sign it off, and he said, oh, yeah, what's that? Oh, yeah, I'll sign that. But when it came round to it, I could just sign off changes to the design on my own authority. But it didn't half go quickly, and we ended up with a load of budget left, and we delivered on time. Because the guys, I said, well, get on with it, guys. You know how to manufacture things. You know what the drawing set is. Go. And they went, oh, do you mean we don't have to ask you everything? I said, absolutely. You know what you're doing more than I do, which was a bit of a shock to them. I remember the guy I dealt with, he said, we can't get this particular resistor. He said, and I've got 2 different ones here. One of them I really want to buy. And is that all right? I said, it's nothing to do with me, chap. Just get on and do what you know what I've got to do. What? Oh, well, normally I have to tell the engineer and get a full approval. I said, well, you ain't going to get it from me, from an engineering part. I don't know what you're talking about. Yeah. I'm the project manager. That's what I do. In fact, lots of people said, so what do you do? When I met them, well, I'm a project manager. Yeah, but what do you really do? Are you an electronic engineer or a mechanical? I said, no, I'm a project manager. That's what I do, which was a bit of a shock to some of them.
Yeah.
But apparently that's why I've been brought in. So at the end of that, they said, right, we'd now like you to fix the PMO. We want to introduce EV. And we've got this mandate from the headquarters in London that we must use Artemis Views and this other ERP system and this other configuration system. Go. Usual, really quite vague. Oh, and the site boss said to me, you're going to change project management over my dead body, which is a great way to start a project.
Absolutely.
So we had to kind of work around him, really. And so eventually produced EV for every project on the site. And were able to record EV on a radar chart from out of Excel, where you can plot size of the project against CPI and SPI on the project. Yeah. So the size of the dot represented the size of the project in monetary terms. And we're able to analyze in the end the performance of the individual disciplines. So how were mechanical engineers doing, how were electronic engineers, how was software doing, how were project management doing in terms of their estimating. Because once you've got enough data, you can turn the EV around and say, well, EV is actually measuring the estimating ability. So if you've got a poor SPI consistently, is that because you are estimating badly? And we eventually were able to draw a graph or histogram showing the values of CPI and SPI for every project on the site. And would you believe it came out as a Gaussian distribution and showed that, in fact, we were underestimating. Hang on a minute, I've got to get this right. Overestimating, underestimating time and overestimating cost. So the CPI was 1 point something and the SPI was 0.8 or something. So that actually stacked with the fact that most projects were late, but we were making a profit. And suddenly they started to believe. And then somebody said, oh, great, you're doing a really good job. Let's move it all to SAP, to SAP. And we uprooted to Edinburgh to put the whole company onto SAP, starting with a planning initiative for every project. So every project starts with a plan, which we then fed through into the various parts of the SAP machine. And at that point, I got made into an auditor. After that finished, we finished the design and got made into an auditor, which was partly because I'd been promoting risk management using a tool called Predict, which you may have heard of.
Mm-hmm.
But Predict was at the time, and I think probably still is, amongst the leaders of computerized risk management, and heavily then got into Monte Carlo analysis, which is a whole different way of looking at the world, of course. and found that fun. But as you go into risk management, you eventually hit enterprise risk management or company risk. Where is the company at risk? And that's huge fun because you are encouraged to think the unthinkable. So we were at a site in Luton, right under the flight path into Luton Airport. What if an airplane clips the top of the building? What do we do as a business if that happens? What do we do if there's a fire? What do we do if, I don't know, our subcontractors all go bust? What are we going to do? And all of those happened. Absolutely except the aeroplane. The aeroplane didn't. We went and talked to the civil aviation, or somebody talked to the civil aviation authority and said, what's the likelihood of an accident involving an aircraft landing in Luton? And they said, lower than most places in the country because it's controlled airspace. So it's all under radar control. Better not talk about radar then. And that was part because the design of the building, I'll come on to this in a bit in terms of risk, was designed to mitigate any risk of any emissions from our test equipment ever reaching an aeroplane. So the whole of the laboratory systems were Faraday cages. Incredibly expensive way to build a laboratory. And they had to have radiation-proof, radiation is a bit strong word, but signal-proof doors in and out. If a mobile phone worked in the lab, there was seriously something wrong because they were very, very, very high spec. But despite all that, and despite having a plan, we had a fire in one of the labs. And it just shows you that risk management can do you a favour, because I was a holder of a card of the support firm that we had on retainer for emergencies. And I walked into the office and someone said, have you got that card? And I went, oh, blah, 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 yeah. Oh, could you phone them? Only we've had a fire in the night. Now, the lab it was an electrical fire. It was a signal source which had to be left on to be stable enough to do measurements on EW equipment. And it was an old source, and a relay failed, and it caught fire.
Wow.
Now, the beauty of being prepared is that the fire brigade came in, Sea Watch came in, roaring in with the 4-inch hoses, and they said, whoa, stop. Don't do that, you'll wreck the building, because you'll destroy all of the Faraday cages, maybe. So could you try something else rather than just hose it down? And they said, oh, yeah, we'll try powder. And then they tried carbon dioxide and nearly ran out of both, but the fire went out. Now immediately that day...
Sorry, Roger, I'm going to jump in there,
amazing story.
Before you get in there, mate.
Amazing story.
Can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Ah, cool, Roger. I'm just going to jump in because you have a very great origin story. I think I could have listened to you for the next hour without even interrupting you. We do have to get into the topic, which is very important because you've got some great things to talk about. So I'm going to start this off with a very easy one, which is around what is strategy from your perspective? What is the definition? Let's get a baseline of strategic or strategy from your side of the story.
Strategic is taking well, in a company terms, it's taking it from one state to another state that you want to go to. So you might have a very poor project management performance. You want to improve it. Your strategy is to improve, so you have to do something about it and run a project. So awesome. Strategy is moving from one state to another.
Yeah, I love that. And so the title of this podcast is Strategic Misrepresentation. I'd love to get into what you think this means, because I think we want to get into the...
Well, I've got a definition that I can read out, written by, I don't know how to pronounce this guy's name, Bent Flivberg. Flivberg,
yeah.
Who's written a lot of books about risk management, which is where we get the stuff from. And if I find it here, hang on a sec, the definition. Oh, it's gone small on me. Hang on a sec. Let me just... There's a tendency to deliberately and systematically distort or misstate information for strategic purposes. You might call it fibbing, I might call it strategic misrepresentation.
Yeah.
But it's basically telling somebody something which you believe, which you don't believe. And it's something that all politicians do all the time.
Mm-hmm.
Of course.
Mm-hmm. And projects, right? I mean, Roger, this is what we're talking about, right?
And especially infrastructure projects.
Mm.
I mean, in Australia, you've got the famous Sydney Opera House, which I think was estimated at 86 million, cost nearly 800 million. But the original estimate was 80.
Well, we have
some numbers like that.
We have projects now, Roger, like Northeast Link, which was, it was around 14 billion, and now it's 26 billion.
Yeah,
to build a road.
Well, we've got the trains in the UK, the Elizabeth line under London.
Mm-hmm.
Was late and overspent, but a fantastic project. I mean, unbelievable, really, what they did. Because the problem they had with London is they didn't actually know what was underground. So they'd say, what's this sewer doing here suddenly? Oops, who put that there? Move on a bit. Who put this mine shaft here? Or this well here? No mapping at all. So they kept having wonderful time. And now, of course, HS2 from London to Birmingham.
So, Roger, how does it start? How does misrepresentation? I don't think people go out their way with intent to just fool people. How does it kind of? I feel like it snowballs. One misrepresentation gets caught up in another, and then it becomes a big thing.
Yeah.
How does it start from your experience?
Well, I having worked on a number of tenders and bids over the years, you desperately want to please. And you want to please because you want to win. And you want to win because you want to pay your mortgage. So you want to stay in a job. So you want to win. And so the easy thing to do is to tell the customer what he wants to hear, even if it's difficult. And we can all work around on projects. We all know that the project is never going to end up the way it started out.
Mm-hmm.
There are going to be changes caused by, you hope, the customer, which you can then catch up a bit.
Yeah. And is it
get some more time, get some more money?
Yeah, and I think as well, when bids go in, one of the procurement weighting scorecards is around value for money or finances, right? So it's motivated by low price, and generally the misrepresentation to start off with is financial. In my experience, is that the same as yours?
Yeah. I think that's where most people come to it. Yeah.
And so
we don't want to tell them that it's going to cost 5 billion when they've only got 2, because we won't have a project. If we get 2, once we get to the most famous case is Concorde, the aeroplane. Concorde went from 140 million to 1,400 each. Wow. 1,400 million each for the development program. I mean, fantastic technology, unbelievable technology for the time.
Yeah.
But wasn't the original estimate.
Yeah, exactly.
So did they know? And I've certainly been in bid conferences and tender vets where you say, well, the estimate we've got is N million, and they say, but actually the customer's only got half of that. So we can't possibly tell them it's going to be N million, because they'll just either give it to somebody who will tell them what they want to hear, or they won't do the project.
Yeah.
So what are we going to do? And then you're in a dreadful position. Well, what you do generally is you write a small number with a long page of caveats in extremely small writing. So that they go, oh, yeah, the politician looks at the headline picture, doesn't see your page and a half of caveats, which say, if this happens, then we'll want more money. If this, we'll want more time. If this, then we'll want both.
Well, that's where I think it is strategic. If I was Roger, if I had to come in low on a big bid, and I knew I couldn't give them the real number because that would scare them off, or I wouldn't be competitive, then I would wait for
Yes,
strategic phases of the project to announce further cost. And I almost see every single mega
exactly what
project doing exactly that. Yeah.
yeah, it's exactly what happens. Yes, and sometimes it's a bigger or smaller fib,
Mm.
but somewhere somebody knew the real number.
Yeah.
Now, whether that was too deep in the organisation, but the engineer bidding, when asked for his estimate, well, does he build in contingency? You bet he does. So you're inevitably struck. You get the engineer's estimate for how long he's going to take to design something, and you go, "No, I ain't going to take that long." He's built in a load of contingency in there to keep himself nice and comfortable and safe. But we want to be aggressive and we want to get on, so we'll cut that, we'll chop that, and that goes on up through the system, and
Mm.
suddenly garbage becomes gospel.
Exactly. And look, I get there's a good definition of strategic benefits and strategic misrepresentation, and we can see in real time this happening across mega projects all across the West. It's not just isolated to one country; it's happening everywhere. So it is a systemic problem.
Absolutely.
Dale, what's your thoughts on this, mate? Let's get you in this conversation.
Oh, where to start? I mean, first off, listening to your origin story, Roger, I'm sure you've had plenty experience of strategic misrepresentation at all levels, from, when you've interviewed people for roles, right? Strategically misrepresenting their skill sets on CVs, all the way through to when you hear about the projects you're involved in on TV and what the politicians are saying their outturned dates and costs would be. And so it happens all the way through from, politics through the supply chain to individuals. And I guess the big question for most people, probably all people listening to this podcast, is one, how can we stop it?
Yes.
Should we stop it?
Yes.
Is it stoppable?
What
And
causes it?
yeah, well, we know what causes it, I think, right? Because so people want to gain something. Whether you're a politician, you want to gain traction with the public, whether you're an individual, you want to get a job, right? You strategically misrepresent what you can do. And so the question begs is it harmful? Is it actually harmful? Or are we just talking about something that actually doesn't really matter?
That's what we've certainly been debating. And we haven't come to any firm conclusions. But I would say that if you're going into the government for bid for infrastructure, if you start a project which is going to cost a lot more, then other projects are going to get cancelled because they haven't got enough money, because your project is absorbing unbudgeted money.
Mm.
So yes, it can be harmful, but it depends where you're looking from.
Yeah, that depends on the lens that you're looking at, right? I mean, take away money from HS2, the second phase,
Absolutely.
and it's harming someone or
Yeah, and
people.
spend it on, but it's equally doing people good, because the railways further up north are going to have some more money spent on them than they would have otherwise.
Exactly. So it depends, right, on the lens. You're absolutely right there. So is it harmful? It depends on, I think, the systematic consequences, right? If it's a balloon, a water balloon, and you're pushing something over here, what's the other
Sure,
thing that gives?
sure.
And I think you're right. If you're looking at just through the lens of I'm strategically misrepresenting this, but not understanding what the consequences are, you might only see a downside to it. And so we need to, look at both sides of the coin, so to speak, when it comes to this, because immediately when people hear strategic misrepresentation, the first thing they think is negative thoughts. It's lying, right? That's what most people think.
I'll give you a positive example later on of where
Yeah,
it was a good.
just go for it now. Yeah, go for it now.
Oh well, we had an APM lecture about an expedition to climb the third highest mountain in the Himalayas, whose name I cannot begin to remember. But he said at the beginning, at the last two were going for the ascent, for the final climb to the top, and they were been climbing for a couple of hours, and they radioed back to the base and said, yeah, this is getting really hard. And the guy said, well, you've got to get to the ridge and then you've got to get the last bit. I reckon it's only 2 hours climbing, guys. And they went, oh, is that all right? Oh, and plodded on. After 2 hours, they phoned back and said, we've got to the first ridge. And yeah, it is probably now 2 hours. But they got to the top.
Yeah, well, I was having a chat. As you know, I was playing cricket just before this, and I was chatting to one of my mates, and I was saying, if you're going into any tournament, right, any sports tournament, and the Euros are on at the moment, as we know, you and I are based in the UK, and if you were Gareth Southgate and you said to England, they are one of the favourites, but let's say they weren't,
yeah,
and if he went in and said, yeah, guys, we're probably gonna struggle to reach the playoffs. But if he strategically misrepresented and went, guys, you're so good, you just haven't reached your potential yet, and I have full faith in you reaching the playoffs and getting through to the semis and even the finals, strategically misrepresenting how he actually feels,
yes,
he puts confidence in those players, right?
yes.
And so where do we draw the line?
Indeed.
And
that's what we're debating. But we think that there is a lot of damage, not least because certainly in the industrial world, you waste a lot of time because you have the whole story built up around the original representation, which then changes, and then you have to do it all again to maybe do it to misrepresent it again, so that it goes to the next stage, and then the people, the customer or the client or whoever they're called, find out and so they start digging around doing investigations and saying, were we fooled? Were we given the truth? Were we blah, blah, blah? So there's a whole pile of investigations go around, which are not terribly productive, I think is the word. It's just playing the games of estimating and contracts. So there's an awful lot of time wasted, which could be used to produce the end product rather than discuss the difficulties with the estimate, in both in time and cost. So yeah, there is a lot of time wasted.
So how many lives does a person get for strategically misrepresenting the same thing? How many times does it happen before the person becomes the boy that cried wolf?
Well, I don't think anybody knows. I think it's a very political thing. At some level, it will be a political decision. You'll know about the post office scandal going on at the moment. Well, that's got an awful lot of strategic misrepresentation in there. Now, that is very damaging to those poor souls that got wrongly accused by a fraudulent, almost fraudulent, we'll find out, I guess, misuse of data.
Yeah, absolutely. So for those listening, if you had to draw a line and give people advice on where the line actually is for do's and don'ts when it comes to strategic misrepresentation, what would your advice be?
Keep the original data. I think that's where we're going to end up is that the original baseline has to be kept, irrespective of the price that's quoted. What was the cost, and who made the decision to disassociate price and cost? Because they are disassociated, even though people think they're not. You can quote any price you like based on the estimate and hope I've certainly worked with people who said, well, it was all right when I left.
Yeah. And one of the things that I was taught, fairly early in my career when it came to projects, and I think it applies to more than just projects, and I know, Val, you've been also, you've been taught this with your mentors and coaches as well, is under promise and over deliver. But strategic misrepresentation feels like it's the opposite of that.
Yeah.
Right? And so how do you reconcile the two? Because if you are to navigate this world of project management and project delivery, it's how do you under promise, over deliver, yet apply strategic misrepresentation to the benefit of project delivery?
Yeah. And that is what we are definitely grappling with in the governance arena. How do we stop it or make it have little damage and little impact?
Well, here's a
And I
question,
don't
Roger.
think we've got any firm conclusions except maintain the original baseline as a record. And that's maybe where the modern tools are going to help, because it's easy to keep the record.
What about Roger? What about accountability? Because when we say giving it to projects, because we could talk about politicians all day, I'm sure about this. But if we said, because I think the appropriation of taxpayer money is important, right? So for government-based or funded projects, or at least there is an accountability piece that's important, because there's only a finite amount of money that we can spend, and governments are increasingly looking for ways to tax us more so they can spend more and misappropriate more. But strategic misrepresentation on projects that are funded by government, usually this accountability piece, is it an individual? Like, do we say if you strategically misrepresent something, like is it one person? Is it a group of people? Is it the C-suite? Is it the whole project? Is it the client?
Well, I think we're coming to recognise that it's actually a behaviour issue,
Mm-hmm.
and maybe it's an emotional issue, and maybe there's a lot in there that we've got to talk to the people experts and say, why do people do it? Why can I start a job? My very first day at work in Marconi, I was told, this is the estimate for the whole development project. Nobody believes it for a minute, but that's the figure we've agreed with the customer. And they know that it's not the final number, and they know that the timescale is a load of nonsense. But their ambition at the time was to make sure there was a radar industry in the UK and not buy American.
Yeah, and we had some other challenges, Roger, don't we? Like 4-year terms. So if you have a government-funded project and it's not an election year, we tend to run into strategic misrepresentation around promises from these representatives, right? And as a representation of this misrepresentation on projects, that they commit certain funding while they're in term, and if they can't deliver, they can't deliver. We've got a massive housing crisis, for example, in Australia. 80,000 houses a year was the promise. We're never going to hit that target, ever. But it was a promise. But there's funds being obviously allocated.
They're promising 800,000 here.
Oh, really? Good luck with that.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, nobody believes a word of it.
Yeah, exactly. So I think one of the challenges you really well point out is it's this behavioral thing. And I'll probably go back into then how do you change behaviors, right? And you have to start, much to what Dale said before about it's how you start your career, right? And how you're coached and mentored and educated. What are we doing about that? If we know consciously as institutions, and there's various project management certifications out there, how are we curbing strategic misrepresentation as a behavior? What traits or what kind of pillars of ethical reinforcement are we putting into these programs? Because at the moment we do a lot of technical training, I think, but we don't train much on the behavioral side of leadership and project execution, so that maybe we can avoid some of these pitfalls of human behavior.
Yes, I think you're right. We should be trying to do that. I think the only way we're going to be able to do that is we're going to have to create the crisis amongst the leaders, where the leaders who have been caught, for want of a better word, don't get to be leaders anymore. So the only way that we're going to do that, I think, and it's going to take a very long time, is data. If you've got the baseline, the original baseline data, and you see that somebody has changed that data, and you've got a record of it, then you know who the culprit, for want of a better word, is, who is strategically misrepresenting. And then slowly they can be weeded out of the system, or retrained, as it's called. And hopefully we'll go that way with the data finding out that people are unreliable when they make statements, in that there's no data to back up their statements of
And you
time
were
and
quite
cost
you were quite
and
right, Roger.
performance as well.
You said something really interesting before. You said, you know, there are people on projects who know the project is being misrepresented, right? At some point, usually project controls and various others who have
Yes.
access to that data that you talk about. Do we need some type of whistleblower protection on government-funded or taxpayer-funded projects that gives them the
I think
ability to honestly submit?
definitely.
We don't have that now, though, do we?
It's a very easy thing to say, we'll whistleblower protection, but would you employ a whistleblower? That's the problem. If you know somebody is a whistleblower, okay, they've got to leave the firm where they blew the whistle, but are you going to employ somebody who might blow the whistle?
Exactly. And some people blow the whistle more than others, right? So, you know.
Well, yeah, and usually whistleblowers definitely lose out. With all the protection in law you can put in, basically they're unemployable.
Well, it's reputational damage,
So I
right? I mean,
suppose you only get old people to blow the whistle.
yeah. There's other people with FU money or people who are on their way out and don't really care about the consequence. But it's hard to state that
Yeah.
curbing behavior through giving people access to anonymize problems on projects is actually going to change the way projects are delivered. It's not really going to be the swinger, is it? Because they're being fed by that hand, and it's detrimental to their lifestyle if they decide to start complaining and bitching and moaning and pointing out problems in projects. That sounds like another problem, right? Not a solution. Dale, what do you think about this? I know you're pondering.
I was just going to jump in there, Val. I think this is why in our industry, technology is late to be adopted. Because all the tech out there, it gathers data and tells you the most accurate truth based on that data. And because you can't control the likes of the current technology that's available, people don't like it. So they don't want to use it, right? The project director, the program manager, they don't want to use the tech because it won't tell the story that they want to tell. It'll tell the story of what the data is telling.
Yeah.
Right.
Mm.
And so then it becomes a problem. And this is the challenge. We have some fantastic technology companies out there that can improve project delivery. I'm not trying to sell, tools, but I know a lot of
That's
fantastic.
a whole can of worms.
That's a whole can of worms. But we can improve the outcomes of projects for the lives of people. And let's face it, most of the projects we work on, the people that listen to this podcast work on, are large infra projects that improve the lives of the public that they serve, whether it's railway, utilities, defense, whatever it is, right? It's for public at large. And isn't it in the public interest to improve project outcomes?
Absolutely, it is.
Absolutely. And yet we have this strategic misrepresentation that is a blocker to progress. So yes, we painted a positive on it and how it could be used for positivity, but I think there's a huge downside to it as well. And we need to recognize that because it's stifling. And as a project professional, it's disheartening because you have huge organizations that could be doing so much better if only they just buried their egos and said, okay, well, how can we come together? Well, egos. Okay, there we go. That you bit on egos. I'll stop talking, Roger. What's your opinion on egos?
I was agreeing with you. Go on. Absolutely.
Yeah. So, Val, you love the tech space. And, I know you dabble as well on your own privately on the tech that could improve the way we deliver projects. And I think regardless of the amazing tech we have, this strategic misrepresentation is going to be a problem for adoption.
Well, it's a problem as well for the profession of project professionals, because I think we've got a bad reputation because people say, 2%, only 2% or some number like that of projects completely satisfy the iron triangle, time, costs and specification. But I think in the governance special interest network, we're coming to the realization that actually the project professionals are getting a hard time incorrectly, because we are forced to try and meet ridiculous timescales, ridiculous costs, and consequently we fail. And all of those are strategically misrepresented. So I think given a free run, given a project without too much interference, we deliver. We actually do deliver all three, and we are all consciously trying to do so. But because of the strategic misrepresenting, we're all desperately working to try and meet ridiculous targets.
And we wonder why we struggle to attract
decisions sometimes.
Yeah, we wonder why we struggle to attract people into project management as a profession.
Yes.
Rock in a hard place, right?
Yes. So if we can dampen it down, for want of a better term, then maybe we'll get a better rep. And instead of a few percent, it'll go to 50. If it went to 50%, it would be spectacular improvement in the public eye, and that's important. And maybe we would see chief project officers being sitting on boards of companies and in government boards to make sure that the projects were set off appropriately, that the projects were defined properly, had good sponsors and all of those good things, so that the poor project manager has got a chance.
Well, I think there's a few things. It's funny because I love tech, Roger, and I'm in the data. I'm just an early adopter, let's call it that. So I love exploring, but I actually think, because I challenge myself on it, because there's a kind of a concern in I would say that the digital circles that I work in, that there's an assumption or the premise for all technology is that it can solve all problems. And I don't think that's true.
Yeah.
Not with human beings. I think that's actually a false.
I absolutely agree with you.
I actually think it's a false representation of human behavior. If it was that easy, we'd all be transactional robots, but it's not. What I actually think, and this is just my own opinion, so I think, and you said something very interesting at the start of this podcast around estimates. I think there's probably three things we could do, just really simple things. One, stop building mega projects. They are the biggest misrepresentations, because the bigger the price, the more criminality or misleading or dodgy stuff that goes on. My personal view. Second thing is, I think C-suite should get a report card on the projects that they've served, not a CV. So everyone these days now has a big CV, Roger, and they've worked on all these big mega projects and they look amazing, but it's an absolute bollocks. It's a crock. You will never find a good person because they've worked on mega projects. So it's a hard way to assess people now. We need to fix that. And then the third one, I think, is around
You're good at playing the game rather than delivering the projects.
Well, fair enough, right? I mean, the whole system in capital works and capitalism is, generate value, game the system. That's how it's built, right? It's a competitive market, so you do what you need to do, and that kind of skews the conversation. But if we get those two right, if we chunk down things, because this is something that is kind of inbuilt in project controls. We decompose. It's the decomposition of scope, right? That's how we start.
Yeah.
Before we do anything else, like, all right, what are we trying to do? Let's break this down. Mega projects should be the same, but the third thing should be around decision management. I think what happens personally is we make poor decisions, but we don't know whether we were good or bad because we never reflect on the decisions we've made against the data that we've been informed on. So what if we also measured ourselves on the effectiveness of the decisions that we made and said, oh shit, these decisions we're making over the last quarter have not been good, have not changed or moved the needle in a positive way. Let's change our behavior or our tactic or our strategies or whatever. And
there's a whole heap of stuff in there, but
those 3 points, Roger, if we made all of that public as well on government projects, there's something about kind of reputation and government and public scrutiny that just gets.
But also, there's also the bit I think you've got to remember that people say, well, just give me all the data and I'll make a decision. Well, if you get all the data, there's no decision to be made. So we are always making decisions with half data at best, and sometimes 10% data.
Or lagging data, right?
And we get to a point on a project where we go, eeny, meeny, miny, mo, we'll go that way. I can't really make a decision in any rational way. I've just got to go with my gut feel, and I think that's the way to go.
Yeah.
There's also a point I have to I find myself talking a lot about AI at the moment around governance and about what we're going to do with it, and I hear lots of for want of a better word, the zealots, the AI vendors, saying just give us the data and we can do anything you want, and I go, that's the problem. The problem is not the mechanization of the readings or the decision process. The problem is the data. The data is going to be absolute rubbish to start with, and it's going to be all over the place because you don't know who's judged it and where they've come from, what they're doing. We had a Marconi system called PIMS, called Project Information and Management Metrics System, which asked everybody to put certain data on their projects into a database, which would then automatically produce their monthly report, which would be reviewed by the contract status review every month. Now, there was all sorts of behaviours that had to be sorted out as well. First of all, in the beginning of the process of changing the behaviour, you have to represent the contract status review was something as a project manager you went in, you put a book down the back of your trousers and tried to find a particularly difficult graph to explain for half an hour, hoping that you weren't going to get beaten too badly because the managers were, let's wheel the guilty bastard in, we'll give him a fair trial. We're out to catch people out, not to help. And we had to change the behaviour to, how can we help you guys? How can we help you, Mr. Project Manager, deliver your project? Not how can we catch you out for not doing it? And the problem we had in getting that together, the EV data was all over the place, absolutely dreadful, and we just battered away for a number of months, well, years perhaps is closer, to get the data to be at least consistent. And then we could find out that the outliers on the EV radar chart were not due to a badly managed product. There was no plan at all. And so there wasn't a plan. So therefore, and we also found out that, bizarrely, the project managers that followed the process were the good project managers. But we couldn't decide which was cause and which was effect. Was it that the good project managers listened and did what we asked as good practice, or was it something that they did and we happened to fit the good practice? Never did find that out, really. Which was cause and which was chicken and which was egg, we couldn't find out. But it is interesting that in the world of AI, everybody is promising the earth. It's such early days that I don't think anybody really knows. The people might have guessed right, but it's very early days with AI. And there's nothing wrong with that. And you've got to try. For sure, you've got to try. But don't go making huge statements about the efficacy of a particular project using AI because you might be wrong.
Well, I think even if you have, even if you have a genie in the bottle, it depends who has it, right? Even with AI technology, you could still apply it the wrong way and get a wrong result, right? It's not necessarily the technology's fault that it can't solve the problem. It's actually that even as a project collective community, and we've interviewed Roger, a couple of hundred people almost, and in our last 5 years of podcasting, we've heard all sorts of stories, which are great. We love them. And what's considerably true is everyone has an opinion on what works for projects. Some people are more leaning towards the tech solution. Some people think it's more of a humanistic issue. Some are in between. I don't think we're going to solve every project the same way. And this is something that Dale and I agree that this unique endeavor needs to have two trains of thought. One of them is we need to increase the speed in which quality information, is received by the decision maker. And you can do that through technology.
Yes.
We can increase the workflow speed. What you can't speed up is
But
human
they
beings.
need to understand how it's working,
They need to
what
understand
it
where
is
it's
actually telling them,
correct. The assumptions beneath the data set.
and
Yeah.
ask it the right questions. I mean, in the early days of EV, you'd say, well, here's the SPI or the CPI for this project, and they'd go, I don't want to know that. What do I want to know that for? Go away and just tell me it's on time.
As earned value technicians ourselves, we know that even that data can be, manipulated to tell a story.
Strategically misrepresented.
Yeah,
And
as being true.
but also meant a lot of people don't understand even that level of data. So you're struggling to kind of represent the truth
Absolutely.
with mostly lagging indicators, right? I mean, even SPI, CPI are based on previous past performance, and so it doesn't indicate any future benefit if you don't know how to change.
The first thing you do if you've got a bad EV is you change the future plan.
Mm-hmm.
You say, well, yeah, we've only got so much money. The budget is actually a fixed sum of money at some level. Therefore, we're going to have to change the way we work to meet the target.
Well, then
even though at the moment we're not doing very well.
No, and that's because the second track is like human organization. So human organization, it's its own, body of knowledge. It's completely separate to how technology might work. Because if you think about how hierarchies are set up in project teams, they're set up for a business purpose. So you have a company with a project organizational structure, and then that company delivers projects. So they have a vertical structure delivering horizontal projects. And that's where you get some challenges, especially if there's more than one entity. So you have a client that has a hierarchy. You have the business entity.
And worse than that, they're all drawn as straight lines.
Correct, but that's not how projects are delivered, right? They're delivered like from an assembly perspective. They're delivered in engineering formats like design, install, commission, etc. So those cross-product teams.
But every work breakdown structure you produce, these usually has got straight lines in it. And then you say, but what are we going to do about the work that Charlie does? That doesn't fit in any of the boxes.
Well, it's classic,
so you stick
right?
Charlie in one of the boxes and say, well, that's fine. That's just an anomaly.
Yeah, and particularly like if you look at more projects that are system engineering based now, where they've got a V life cycle, and then you implement the V life cycle, and if it includes software, then you've got kind of agile type ways of working because you've got rework and patching, and so you end up with like a hybrid of methodologies. My last question to you before we kind of wrap up today, Roger, is which methodology is going to give us the least amount of strategic misrepresentation?
None of them and all of them. It depends, because I think methodology, I can't predict methodology because I can't predict what the project's about.
Mm.
And I think we have to be very careful. I was party to the governance SIG writing of something directing agile change, which is talking about the dangers really of using agile incorrectly. So don't believe the myths. The myths are that it's out of control and you just let the engineers do their thing and it's be all right. Not true.
Mm.
That it's less control, actually, not true. It's more control. That you need to take the whole organization with you when you're going with agile, because if you say, yeah, it's going okay, we've just delivered the software and they found 48 faults with it, isn't that great? The old style manager would say, you've done what? You've delivered faulty software? You're sacked, kind of thing. So we have to be very sure that the whole organization understands how you're working. If you're working with scrums and all of those things, then people have got to understand what is happening, and that you are going to let the customer see an early version of software that's not finished and is going to have some terrible holes in it. But they're there, so it doesn't matter. As long as they all know and work with that, it's fantastic. It works really well. Equally well, if you try to build a house using Agile, you might end up, if you listen to the the lady of the house specifying the house with a beautiful kitchen and no roof. So you've got to be very careful how you use these techniques. So I think most projects are going to end up as hybrids.
Yeah, I think you're right, Roger. And I'm glad you sort of took a very general question from Val and gave it a little specificity. It's very late for me, so hopefully that
Yeah,
word's
I know it's that
come up
word
right.
anyway.
Yeah, that word. You know which word I'm going for. But I think you're right. It's about horses for courses, using the right tools for the job. You know, all that type of thing. Don't use a hammer. You know, for to get a screw into a piece of wood. That type of scenario. But look, I mean, as Val said, we could chat to you for hours, days,
I'm sure I
because
love talking about this sort of stuff.
yeah, and you have a true passion for it, and we truly appreciate folks like yourselves coming on here that are open and willing to share freely their opinions and where they stand on things, because this is how we grow the profession, is by giving them perspective. And so we really, really thank you for your time. But before we let you go, we do have a tradition on the podcast where we take our new guests through a pop quiz, so it's a bit of fun.
Go on then.
But it's called Fiverr, so just 5 quick fire questions and answers. So if you're ready, we'll take you through that and see how you fare. So what book are you currently reading?
What's my what? Sorry.
What book are you currently reading?
I'm reading Mike Atherton's autobiography, and I'm also reading a book about Alan Turing.
Oh, very good, very good. Number 2. If there is one lesson you'd pass to a project professional from your career, what would it be?
Be careful.
You don't have to say any more. Be careful. I love it. Awesome. Very, very concise and clear.
I think it would. If in doubt, check it out.
If in doubt, check it out, folks. You've heard it here first from Roger Garrini. Question 3. What would you tell your 10-year-old self?
Oh, listen more.
I think Val would tell his 40-year-old self the same thing.
I think I would as well.
Number 4. How long before AI changes the way projects are delivered?
How long's a piece of string? This is going to be the generation of AI, but it's only just started. So it could be 5 years, it could be 3 years, it could be 20 years. No idea.
Okay. Nice.
We have no idea what it's going to produce.
3-point estimate. I'll accept 3, 5, and
But you haven't asked me what the distribution of the answers are.
Oh, we'll triangulate it and we'll come back. We'll do a bit of Monte Carlo. And
I would agree with that.
And then number 5, if you could choose a superpower for a day, what would it be?
I'd make everybody tell the truth.
Abolish strategic misrepresentation. Yes. I love it how you brought it all the way around back to the topic.
What they really think and what they really believe.
Truth serum. There we go.
Truth serum, yeah.
Well, hopefully the listeners know by now what you get on the Project Chatter podcast is truth from us, certainly from Val, myself, and we believe all of the guests that come on are sharing truthfully what they think. And so there's a bit of truth serum on this podcast. And so hopefully we're doing our bit to pay it forward as well. But Roger, look, it's been an absolute privilege and pleasure to have you on the podcast.
It's been a pleasure and privilege to talk to you guys.
Yeah, big shout out to Nameen Latif as well for putting us in touch with you. She reached out, and so hopefully we'll get Nameen on the podcast as well to share her views.
Take the mickey out of me, yeah, I know.
There we go. But look, like I say, it's been fantastic. And final thoughts before we let you go. Is there anything you want to leave our listeners with?
Yeah, I think we've all got to address strategic misrepresentation. I think we've all got to know that it exists. We've all got to know that we need to interrogate things that are said to us, and I don't mean that in a tied to a chair type of way. Although sometimes that would be very useful. Bit more current, please. But I think we have to be mostly aware that it's going on and be very careful to caveat any estimates we give to people and give them the whole story. You know, we get our politicians to say, it's going to cost 140 million. Why? Because I said it is.
Yeah, trust me, I'm a project manager.
Yeah, trust me, I'm a project manager. That's right.
No, fantastic. And
That's
I'm
the way
sure
it's got to go.
Yeah, and I'm sure the listeners will take a lot more than just your final thoughts away from this episode, because you've given us a lot to consider and absorb and think about. So thank you so much for your time. Val, any final thoughts from you?
No, Roger, thanks for coming on. We hopefully have you come back at some point and we can continue the conversation in various facets. But yeah, appreciate your story.
Great.
Yeah, really liked the conversation. Thanks for your time.
Thank you.
So, folks, there you have it. This is the end of this episode. But remember, if you like what you've heard, please do help us pay it forward and share a link to this episode on your favorite social media. Once again, a massive thank you to our guest, Roger Garrini, and thank you all for listening. Till next time, we say stay safe, be disruptive, and have fun doing it. From me and Val, it's bye for now.